In late 2020 and early 2021, at what was then the height of the pandemic, friend of the show Maximilian Alvarez conducted a series of intimate interviews with workers of all stripes from all around the United States. Those conversations, documented in Max's new book, The Work of Living, Working People Talk About Their Lives in the Year the World Broke, paint a deeply human history of one of the defining events of the 21st century, told by the people who lived it.
Friend of the show and editor-in-chief of the Real News Network, Max Alvarez, joins us now to discuss. Welcome back to Rising.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And Ryan and I were co-hosting the show. We talked to you a little bit about this book, but we only got just this deep into it. So let's pick up that conversation, and the audience should definitely go check out the first video. Tell us another story of the kind of person you interviewed for this book.
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you so much for having me on to talk about it. The first time and this time, and I apologize to everyone that first time that we talked about it, I gave a lot of discussion about the motivation of the book, but I didn't get to focus on the meat of the book, which is the workers, right? The workers' stories. I'm like a broken record every time I'm on this show or another show. I always say, don't listen to me, listen to the workers, right? So if you buy this book, which I hope that you do, I hope that people read it, you will find interviews with 10 different workers from around the country working in different types of industries, coming from different walks of life, and all of whom experience, in different ways, the onset of COVID-19. I really wanted to try to have these interviews be like the ones that I do on my podcast, Working People, right? And the focus of that has always been, on the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of our fellow workers. And because I want people to understand that there's so much more to working people than just a name tag or a job title, right? There's so much history and heart there. And you see that in these interviews. I speak to Nick, a gravedigger in New Jersey, who talks about his experience burying people in the first months of COVID-19 and how the number of burials exploded by a factor of 3. And he describes what it was like to work in that environment, what it was like to navigate the grief of other families, the fear that he had of contracting this virus. But also, he's a human being. He talks about the skepticism that he had about the media and its reporting on COVID-19. I wanted all of that raw human stuff to make it in the book. And I think that if you read these stories, you see first, again, just how deep and complex and beautiful and valuable every single human life is. But on top of that, you realize how much hard work it took to keep society afloat during COVID-19 pandemic when, the other systems that we had entrusted to take care of us were in fact failing us, whether that was the unemployment system that had been hollowed out and buckled in the early days of COVID-19. Whether that was, a PPP program that just basically ended up being bosses stealing a bunch of money from taxpayers and not paying, workers to stay on the payroll like they were supposed to. Whether that be companies like Amazon making a marketing ploy out of calling their workers heroes and granting them hero pay, and then suddenly ripping that away just weeks later, even though workers continued to work and die in those warehouses, right? You really get, I think, a ground level sense of what working people went through during this horrific time, but you also see just how heroic people are on an everyday level, how much love and care it took from our neighbors and our coworkers and family members to keep this from being worse than it actually was. People brought food to each other. People found ways to be in connection with each other, even if it was virtually, right? We found so many ways to take care of each other because ultimately we are all we have. And I think that really comes through in the book. You see, like I said, all of the essential labor that people do on a day-to-day basis to keep society afloat. And I just want people to always remember that and to carry that lesson forward into the future.
Yeah, Max, it's been a really interesting week because there's been a discussion about working people, and in some ways, whether or not they benefit from this newest policy from Joe Biden, the student debt cancellation. And there's a lot of jockeying, as there is in many political contexts, to speak for working people. And I think all of us, myself included, could do a lot better to have people from different kinds of economic backgrounds in particular interviewed directly on these kinds of shows. I know that I personally am so grateful for having a call-in show where I do get to talk to people outside of my own bubble on a at least bi-weekly basis. But I wonder what you make of some of the tenor of the conversations that get had, where a lot of people, many of us who are in this situation where we're able to be newscasters and journalists and speak for others and write about others, aren't necessarily from the milieu that we are representing. And I wonder, when you're talking to people and they're telling you in an apolitical way about their experiences and what they want without the gloss that comes with, news coverage, how do you reconcile how they're being presented in the media and how they're seeing themselves? And to what extent do the kind of typical political frames that we all work with end up emerging as you're trying to elicit these stories?
It's a great question, and it is a difficult task, right? And I guess I would just say up front that media personalities and journalists are not inherently bad. We need journalists doing this work. We need folks.
I'm going to stop
like
you there, Max.
I was about to pay you both a compliment. That's a point well thing. But we all have a role to play. Some of the workers that I interviewed watched this show, and they told me that they when I reached out to them, they were like, "Oh, I know you. I watch Rising." Right? So there is important stuff there. But I would say for all of us, as I've been beating this drum for years now, it is not our place to ventriloquize working people. It is our responsibility to lift up the voices and struggles of working people by letting them speak for themselves. I said this on your show, Bree, and I was very grateful to have the opportunity to do so. My editorial strategy, whether it was when I was an editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education, now editor-in-chief at the Real News Network, or host of my podcast, Working People, or now author of this book, my editorial strategy and my editorial duty is let the rabble in, let people speak for themselves, give people the opportunity to hear directly from their fellow workers about what they're going through, how they're making sense of the world around them. And I think that, a lot of people in the media don't want to do that because they know, in fact, that their own agenda might be upended if working people are actually let in the room and given the opportunity to refute their BS talking points. And I think that one of the things that I'm really proud of in this book is that I do give people the space to say their piece, right? I don't try to steer people, into a political territory that I think that they need to be in. There are a lot of views expressed by the workers I talk to that I don't personally agree with, but that wasn't the point of the book. The point of the book was to capture them and their lives and their impressions. And so, I am going to constantly be on this crusade to get outlets to have working people write op-eds, interview working people for longer than just a 2-minute soundbite, because again, there is so much more to us. And I will also doggedly pursue and berate other pundits who feel that they have been deputized to speak for working people without actually giving working people the chance to speak for themselves. And like you said, Bree, that was very apparent as we were discussing the student debt cancellation thing. I think a lot of pundits were telling on themselves and showing that, in fact, they don't know a whole lot of workers, because they were saying, oh, no working person has student debt. It's all elites who go to Ivy covered campuses. Man, I worked at, as a temp in a warehouse 10 years ago in Southern California. I had a lot of student debt from one of those Ivy-covered campuses, the University of Chicago. I was a first-generation student to attend that, along with my siblings. And when I was at that warehouse, I didn't want to talk about my debt because I thought that was the case, that I was the only one who had it. Then over smoke breaks, I realized that I was working alongside a lot of people who had also accrued a lot of debt because they had been taken advantage of by predatory programs at DeVry, ITT Tech, and all of these for-profit kind of programs that have screwed people. It just, again, if you were out there honestly saying that, we shouldn't cancel debt because it actually doesn't, working people don't hold that debt. Yes, they do. And you would know that if you actually just talk to people. Right?
Well, thank you, Max. I really always very sincerely appreciate your insights wherever you give them, and I look forward to reading your new book.
Thanks, guys.
Here it is, The Work of Living by Maximilian Alvarez. Check it out. Where can people get it, Max?
So people can buy it from the Or Books website. It is now officially out, so you can ask your local bookstore to stock it. You can buy it through your favorite independent bookstore. If you absolutely have to buy it through Amazon, that's your prerogative. I'm not going to berate you for that, but it is available everywhere. And again, there's just so many people. If I can just give one quick shout out, Nick, the gravedigger in New Jersey, Willie, a gig worker in Texas, Kyle, a sheet metal worker in Louisville, Pucks, a burlesque performer in Seattle. There are so many amazing people in this book who I'm so grateful to for talking to me about it, and I hope that people read their stories and lift them up. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you.